I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. I knew who I wanted to call. I could feel the shape of her voice in my mind, the way she'd complain about the leftovers in her fridge or the cold weather in Ohio. But the contact list showed a terrifying void. Where the word mom should have been, there was only a blank, white space. I tried to speak her name out loud, to force the syllables past my teeth, but my throat locked up. I didn't know it. I didn't know the name of the woman who'd raised me. Beyond the window, the world had vanished, replaced by a wall of fog so thick and unnaturally wide it looked like the earth had simply stopped existing 10 feet past my porch. I'd woken up late that morning, January 2nd, feeling the full, crushing weight of the post-holiday slump. The house was a disaster area. Empty beer cans, crumpled wrapping paper, and half-eaten plates of turkey were scattered across the coffee table. The air felt heavy, stagnant, and smelled of stale pine needles and cheap champagne. It wasn't just the usual hangover. It was a physical pressure, a hollow ache in my chest that made every movement feel like I was wading through waist-deep mud. The festive lights draped over the TV felt mocking, their rhythmic blinking synchronized with the dull throb in my temples. I reached for a framed photo on the mantel, a shot from last year's Christmas dinner. My sister, Sarah, was supposed to be standing right there, holding a glass of wine and laughing at some stupid joke I'd made. As I gripped the frame, the ink began to shift. Right under my eyes, her features started to bleed together. Her eyes dissolved into her cheeks. Her mouth smoothed over. And within seconds, she was a blank-faced mannequin in a red sweater. I dropped the frame. It hit the hardwood floor, but the glass didn't shatter. It just sat there, reflecting a room that felt colder than it had a minute ago. Panic started to set in, a sharp, cold spike in my gut. I stumbled toward the hallway, heading for the front door. On the way, I glanced at the rug where my wife's boots always sat. Heavy, salt-stained winter boots she'd complained about just yesterday. They were gone. Not moved. Not hidden. Just gone. The indentations they'd made in the rug fibers were smoothing out as if nothing had ever rested there. I knew she existed. I could remember the smell of her perfume, a faint hint of vanilla and sandalwood, but I couldn't remember the color of her eyes. I grabbed the brass handle of the front door and flung it open, desperate for the sight of a neighbor, a car, or even a stray dog. There was nothing. No streetlights. No asphalt. No sound of distant traffic or wind through the trees. Just a silent, blindingly wide abyss that pressed right up against the doorframe. It wasn't a mist. It was a solid wall of nothingness. I reached out a hand, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The silence was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to swallow the very idea of a world outside my four walls. a shadow began to form in that oppressive white wall. A dark smudge that gradually took the shape of a man. He stumbled across the threshold of my porch, his boots clicking rhythmically on the wood. It was my neighbor from 2 doors down. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His coat was unbuttoned, and his eyes were wide, darting around with a frantic, glazed look. In his trembling hands, he clutched a small, stuffed blue elephant.
"I found this in my living room," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's warm. Someone was just holding it. But the house is empty. I checked every room, every closet. I know I'm not alone. But I can't remember who else lives there."
He looked at me, pleading for an answer I didn't have. I opened my mouth to say his name, something common like Mike or Steve, but the word dissolved before it reached my lips. I looked down at the toy for a split second, wondering if it belonged to a daughter or a son I should have known. When I looked back up, the porch was empty. There were no footsteps retreating, no rustle of fabric. He was just gone. I stared at the spot where he'd stood, and a wave of nausea hit me as I realized I couldn't recall a single feature of his face. I didn't even remember having a neighbor at all. I slammed the door and locked it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I grabbed my laptop from the kitchen island, desperate for a digital lifeline. I logged into my social accounts, but the screen was a graveyard. My feed was a series of grey, empty rectangles. I watched the numbers in the corner of the screen. My friends list was hemorrhaging names. 500, 300, 50, 10. It hit 0. It was like watching a global extinction event in real time. Every person I'd ever worked with, gone to school with, or shared a beer with was being scrubbed from the record. The air in the kitchen grew cold, and I noticed a thin, wispy vapor curling out from the ceiling vent. It didn't rise like steam. It sank, heavy and purposeful. A stray tendril brushed against the edge of the mahogany dining table. I watched in horror as the solid would turn ghostly and translucent, revealing the floorboards beneath it before the entire corner of the table simply vanished into a faint, white haze. I slumped against the counter, the weight of the New Year's gloom turning into a paralyzing despair. What was the point of fighting? Everyone was gone. I was alone in a dissolving box. As my head dropped into my hands, the fog from the vent surged, thick and hungry, spilling across the floor toward my feet. I realized then that the fog wasn't just a weather event. It was a reflection. The more I let this emptiness hollow me out, the more the world outside mirrored that void. My own apathy was the fuel, and the fog was coming to finish the job I'd started by giving up. I scrambled to the junk drawer in the kitchen, tossing aside old batteries and menus until I found my leather wallet. I pulled out my passport with trembling fingers, hoping the government-issued ink would hold some truth. My face stared back at me from the photo. Dark hair, tired eyes, a face I'd seen in the mirror for decades. But the lines next to surname and given names were blindingly white. It was as if the printer had simply skipped over them. I stared at the empty space, trying to scream my own name in my mind. But there was only a hollow echo. I was becoming a ghost in my own skin. A man with a face but no identity. The silence outside was broken not by a sound, but by a vibration that seemed to bypass my ears and settle in my bones. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the living room window. From the depths of that white abyss, voices began to drift in. They weren't screaming or crying out in pain. They were low, rhythmic moans of desperation. 1,000 whispers layered on top of each other.
Remember me.
A woman's voice pleaded.
Please? Just remember I was here.
A man groaned. They were the sounds of people who had already been erased, lingering in the fog like static on a dead TV channel, begging for a single mind to hold onto their existence. No, I muttered, my voice sounding thin and foreign. I won't let it happen. I grabbed a thick black Sharpie from the counter and ran to the hallway. I began to write in huge, jagged letters across the eggshell-colored drywall. I wrote the names I still had left. Names of old high school friends. The girl from the coffee shop. My first boss. I scrawled them over the wallpaper, across the closet doors, and even on the ceiling. I thought if I could just fix the words into the physical world. The fog couldn't take them. I was building a fortress of ink against the encroaching nothingness. The fog didn't like that. The wisps coming through the vents suddenly thickened, turning from a lazy mist into a roiling, aggressive tide. It flooded the hallway, swirling around my legs like freezing water. As the white vapor touched the names I'd just written, the black ink began to crack and peel. The letters didn't just fade. They turned into a fine, white powder that sloughed off the walls and settled on the floor like salt. The more I wrote, the faster the fog moved, forcing me back, cornering me in the small breakfast nook at the end of the hall. I reached for my mug, desperate for the familiar kick of the dark roast coffee I'd brewed earlier. I took a gulp, but it felt like drinking lukewarm water. There was no bitterness, no warmth, no flavor at all. I looked at the Christmas tree in the corner. The vibrant green needles had turned a flat, dull grey. The red ornaments were now just spheres of various shades of ash. The world was losing its depth, its texture, and its life. I was standing in a black and white photograph that was slowly being overexposed, waiting for the moment the white would swallow the last of the grey. I stumbled into the bathroom and gripped the edges of the porcelain sink. forcing myself to look into the mirror. The man staring back was a nightmare. My skin was turning the color of milk, and my features were beginning to migrate. My left eye was sliding toward my temple, and my nose was smoothing into a flat, featureless plane. But the horror in the glass wasn't just me. Behind my shoulder, standing in the thick of the fog that now filled the room, was a figure. It stood 7 feet tall, draped in a tattered, frost-covered shroud. It had no face, just a smooth, concave void where a soul should be. It was the embodiment of January, the cold, hollow deity of the new year, coming to harvest the remains of the old world. I fell to my knees, my hand hitting a stray box of decorations I hadn't put away. My fingers brushed against something small and cold. It was a chipped, hand-painted ceramic ornament, a tiny red cardinal my grandmother had given me when I was 6. Suddenly, a jolt of pure, searing heat raced up my arm. I remembered the smell of her kitchen, the sound of the radiator clanking in her hallway, and the scratchy wool of her sweaters. For a heartbeat, the fog recoiled. The room regained its color, and the faceless figure retreated into the shadows. The memory was a sun, burning through the white lie of the abyss. But the sun was dying. As soon as the memory of my grandmother flickered, the faces of my friends, my wife, and my parents began to fight for space in my crumbling mind. I tried to hold them all, but it was like trying to carry a gallon of water in cup hands. The more I reached for one face, the faster the others leaked away. I realized then that the fog didn't just take. It forced you to choose. I closed my eyes and let go of everyone. The neighbors, the co-workers, the distant cousins. I focused every ounce of my remaining will on one single image: my wife's smile. I clung to that one spark, sacrificing everything else I ever knew just to keep her name from turning into white dust. The faceless figure leaned in close, its breath like dry ice against my neck. I opened my mouth to say her name one last time, but instead of air, the fog rushed in, filling my lungs with a heavy, freezing mist. I looked down at my hands. They weren't solid anymore. The skin was fraying at the edges, dissolving into thin white ribbons of vapor. I felt no pain, only a profound, terrifying lightness. I was no longer a man. I was a thought being forgotten. My fingers turned to steam, and the ceramic cardinal fell through my transparent palms, vanishing before it even hit the floor.
On the morning of January 3rd, the sun rose over a landscape that was perfectly, terrifyingly clean. There was no house on the corner of the street. There was no street. For miles in every direction, there was nothing but a flat, pristine field of white snow under a clear blue sky. The world had updated itself, wiping the hard drive of reality to make room for something new. The only evidence that anything had ever existed were thousands upon thousands of empty, wooden picture frames scattered across the frozen ground. They lay half buried in the drifts, glassless and hollow, holding nothing but the cold morning air. Thank you for listening until end. This story was written exclusively for channel Creepy Horror Stories to chill you to the bone during these winter nights. It makes you wonder, if you had to choose only one person to remember before everything vanished, who would it be? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the fog, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new nightmare. Check out our other horror stories on the channel for more urban legends and supernatural tales. Stay safe and keep the lights on.